Blake was a student at my school in the past. Blake was victimized by virtually everyone, both behind his back and immediately to his face. However, it's not as if he didn't deserve it. He was violent and frequently got in trouble for yelling in the instructors' faces because he was brainwashed with notions that contradicted what was taught in school. I suppose it means he is not entirely responsible for his parents' parenting, but that has never stopped anyone. Blake was just as unpleasant physically as he was verbally. After a girl rejected him because he smelled like garbage, he harassed her so severely that he almost got expelled from school. Only if that had passed would the outcome have been different. It began one day when I was in Blake's history class. He interrupted class to debate a teacher's statement regarding the Civil War, which became a major issue. Blake felt severely humiliated as a result of the instructor's icy response to his comments. This resulted in Blake ranting about how the country had been destroyed. Then, we all laughed at him collectively, and he stormed out of school. The day was Friday. Throughout the weekend, Blake posted a variety of content to his Snapchat account. Pictures of him clutching items from his father's gun collection, which he was notorious for bragging about, and pictures of him posing in front of a Nazi flag, which I guess was probably his father's. Worst of all, though, was a photograph of our history, instructor printed and glued to a cardboard box that he used for target practice with the comment, "Getting ready for school on Monday." The posts were somewhat unsettling. People had joked for years that Blake would one day do something similar, but nobody ever believed he had the courage. Several individuals reported the message to the school when they should have contacted the police. No one, myself included, took it seriously enough. If I had known, there was no way I would have attended school until he was cared for. Monday of the following week, Blake arrived late to school during our 5th period American history class. As I later learned, he was unable to enter class as he typically would have. The school resource officer and a few administrators ordered that his backpack be searched. At that point, he grabbed his gun, shot the resource officer, and fled. On the other side of the school, I heard a gunshot. Nothing was audible. Moments thereafter, the lockdown directive was issued. Everyone knew it to be Blake. I regarded my instructor, who was as pale as a sheet. In my mind, I could only see bullet holes in the image of his face from Blake's post. After a few seconds, he gathered his calm and proceeded to lock the door and turn off the lights before telling us all to conceal ourselves. Also, not a time too soon. By proximity, we were all aware that Blake was heading towards him and all of us. I barely had time to consider how the once ridiculous lockdown exercises were no longer so ridiculous. Blake arrived at the classroom door in less than a minute. He began to pound on the door and yell, "I know you're inside. I'm not an idiot." People began crying into their clothes to maintain silence. Others, fearing they would not survive, pulled out their mobile devices and began live broadcasting or texting their loved ones. Even I began to believe this. I could not come up with anything to do. I didn't even have the mental capacity to consider what I could do to fight or defend myself if he were to enter. My mind was overcome with fear, and everything felt so unreal. My sole thought was that I was about to die as I sat on the tile floor of my high school, huddled with other students who were about to become a mass of corpses. Suddenly, a gunshot was heard. Everyone began to panic as the wailing escalated to screams. I made a split-second decision at the moment and went to the window, deciding to leap from the 2nd floor rather than wait for Blake to shoot me. A group of children followed me, but then I became disoriented. Someone else shoved me out of the path and threw me to the ground because I was moving too slowly. I looked back through the door and spotted something at that point. Blake held his face with both hands, and blood oozed between his fingers. The inside door handle was crooked as if he had attempted to break in. I sat there bewildered, unable to make sense of it. Amid the turmoil, the teacher yelled at us to leave the windows and return to hiding. He began calling my name since I was immobile, at which point I muttered, "I believe Blake shot himself." I spoke quite gently compared to how noisy the classroom was, and I sounded like a husk, but enough people heard me cease their activities and go silent. My friend rushed to the door and peered out the window just as Blake sprinted away. I eventually rose to my feet and stood next to him. Blood was splashed across the floor, and in the sudden silence, I could hear Blake's screams of agony booming down the corridor. I foolishly and against all common reason attempted to open the door, but it was broken, not simply locked, as all doors should be designed to be opened from the inside. It was damaged. We were confined to the classroom, but at least Blake had escaped. Hours later, we were finally liberated, and we gradually learned what transpired. Blake attempted to unlock the door by firing the door handle, but he wound up fully jamming the lock and producing an explosion of metal shrapnel that blasted directly into his face. A twisted piece of metal lodged in his eye, blinding him and putting an end to his rampage. A fortunate break for all of us, which disproves the idea that blasting a lock will open it. Before leaving school, Blake surrendered and was tried as an adult. He will be incarcerated for at least 20 years. The resource officer he shot likewise had the good fortune and healed without serious long-term health problems. My high school is located in an area with a high level of gang violence. Thus, lockdowns were rather common. However, the one event that stands out to me when I reflect on the past has nothing to do with that. The only time I genuinely felt afraid wasn't because of a fugitive or a gunshot, but because of a kid who was known to be dangerous. He was named Jason. He was one of those kids who was incredibly smart, but had a lot of problems with authority, attention, socializing, and so on. Everyone probably knows at least one such student from school. Once he was suspended for taking a knife to school, and the next year he was expelled for attempting to strangle a teacher with a shoelace. However, he returned the next year after attending an intervention school for 6 months. Unfortunately, he appears to have returned worse than when he went. Once, when we were both in trouble for different things at roughly the same time, we were both sent to the front office where we ended up sitting together. The assistant principal was scheduled to have a private conversation with each of us, but the day must have been hectic since we had to wait until she finished speaking with someone else first. In a matter of minutes, Jason filled my ears with stories of the children he met at the intervention school, including pyromaniacs, drug traffickers, and gang members. They were undoubtedly a negative influence on him, but he should have stayed there. He appears to have belonged. I was shocked to hear that he made friends there, as he spoke quite highly of his trip. The tales of what he did with those children provided some amusement for me. Then, he revealed some facts that I understood to be bad news. Jason informed me that someone at the intervention school taught him how to construct a bomb. Before I could inquire as to his sincerity, the assistant principal emerged from her office and summoned Jason. That was the last and essentially the last time I ever spoke with him, even though he was once again in difficulty. Despite everything I had heard about him, he was actually in a terrific mood and appeared extremely joyful. I felt he might become better, but I see now the only thing that made him happy was remembering the violent criminals he hung out with and thinking about ways to hurt people. By the 3rd week of school, he was probably aching to return to his previous school. This is the only rationale I can think of for what he did. Otherwise, it seems entirely irrational, unless he truly enjoyed doing it. One day after the 2nd period, just after our conversation, he called in a bomb threat. He was promptly captured, but he refused to reveal the bomb's position, so the entire school was evacuated. When I spotted Jason's clear backpack leaning against the wall of the hallway, we were walking down. I recall my stomach doing a complete flip. Inside the package was a trash bag, so I knew I had to be the bomb. I informed an administrator, who then radioed it in. I felt fortunate that the bomb didn't go off when those children were leaving the building, packed in like sardines. I was trembling as I approached the football field, but I was able to find a seat in the bleachers rather than having to stand. We were out there in lockdown mode for hours, roasting in the blazing heat and simply waiting to go back inside. After the bag was dealt with by the bomb squad, the entire campus had to be combed for further bombs. I was initially terrified, then annoyed, then bored, and eventually restless. I began joking with the individuals seated next to me, claiming I was suffering from a heat stroke and needed to lie down. Nobody was buying my nonsense or making a place for me, so I laid over their feet as a joke. All of it was quite amusing, and they were kicking me while laughing. However, when I was there, I witnessed something that terrified me. Something was taped directly in front of my face to the bottom of the seat. I separated the child's legs to get a better look, and he naturally thought I was acting strange until he noticed the expression on my face. He was seated directly above a bomb. It was a duct-taped box with a letter that read, "This is the genuine article, I swear." I flipped out and leaped from the bleachers, injuring my ankle and sparking widespread fear as everyone fled the area upon learning of the risk. With nowhere safe to hide and 1,000 children running amok, the situation was nearly catastrophic. A few freshmen were trampled and had fractured bones. Kids jumped the fences and raced out onto the road, swarming into surrounding shops. A large number of children seized the opportunity to run home. When the panic subsided, the school was essentially vacant. If Jason ever found out, I'm certain he would die laughing. However, what makes it truly terrible is that it was all fabricated. The bombs were all fake. Our Jason was intelligent enough to construct real explosives and kill people. The only reason he didn't is because he wanted to attend juvie or another intervention school, not a lengthy jail sentence. All of the anxiety, stress, and lost time were only part of a twisted joke that Jason was performing. What makes me shudder is knowing that if he had decided to go through with it, a lot of people would have perished, and I would have very likely been one of them. No one was prepared for the threat, and he identified a massive flaw in the school's response. Misplacements would have been exceedingly lethal if they had been real bombs. I have no idea where Jason is currently, but I hope he stays far away from me for the remainder of my life. I reside in the center of Tornado Alley in Oklahoma. Extreme weather exercises have been a frequent part of school life for decades, even before kids had to cope with all the other emergency drills. I attended middle school in the 1990s, and I have distinct memories of spending at least once a month for years huddled on the floor in the internal hallways of my school with the lights out and my butt essentially sticking up in the air. As a girl, I always felt as though I was exposing myself to all the professors who were strolling the halls, but I was compelled to follow directions regardless of what I said. I began to fear extreme weather lockdowns more than the concept of a lethal tornado. A tornado could strike the area once in a blue moon, but I felt compelled to moon all the strange teachers at school every month. Even worse, lockdowns occurred more frequently than that, because adverse weather conditions are widespread during specific seasons. In May of my 7th grade year, I encountered such a circumstance. My classroom at the time was one of the temporary structures erected around the school to reduce overcrowding. Everyone referred to them as portables, but they were merely flimsy structures. A policy for everyone in a portable during a weather emergency was to immediately leave and seek refuge in the school's main building, leaving everything, including backpacks, behind. Everyone got down on the ground, covered their heads with their hands, and sat in the most uncomfortable, awkward, and questionable position for a significantly longer period than we often did during drills. The teachers informed us that a severe cyclonic storm with a high chance of producing tornadoes was bearing down on us, and that we would not be permitted to return to class until it had passed. All of that was unfathomable to me at the time, but I have since learned to take certain terms seriously. The majority of the time, these lockdowns felt ludicrous and excessive, but on that particular day, as the Halloween winds became louder and the eerie tones of the tornado sirens continued, a genuine sense of dread descended upon us. Initially, it was accompanied by morbid expectancy. I was a little excited to experience a real storm without worrying that my house might be destroyed. I didn't care if the school was destroyed as long as I was safe, but it seemed unlikely that it would be like that. A portion of me truly wished for a tornado. It would have made revealing my derriere to the strange chorus teacher worthwhile. However, the hope did not last long. It was already dark inside because the lights had been turned off, but at first, natural light was still entering from outside. In a matter of minutes, the storm began to obscure the sun to the point where it felt as though an unnatural night had descended upon the planet. The gusts continued to intensify, shaking the doors as if the storm itself were attempting to enter. The hail then began to strike the doors like a barrage of meteors. The once quiet passageway soon became plagued by a cacophony of noise. Fear was pervasive. It was palpable. We all knew the monster was approaching when we heard a low, rumbling, rising roar of rushing winds similar to a passing freight train, which gradually intensified as the monster approached. Even if we couldn't see it, it was indisputable that a tornado was on the ground and nearby, and with each passing second, it became more and more likely that it would strike us directly. Teachers yelled at us to remain calm, but they couldn't hide the terror in their voices as several students began to cry. When the walls began to tremble, they took cover as well. For a few minutes, we were all equalized in this compromised posture that was intended to keep us secure, and nobody had to worry about anyone peeking through their crack. We all had more pressing issues. I could feel the air itself vibrating at the frequency of a tornado in my chest. Outside, I heard sounds of violence and destruction, with debris banging into the doors and then flying out into the distance. It was as though the globe were being fed into a chipper. The most horrifying moment was when the windows finally broke under the pressure. The storm had finally reached the interior of the building, and there was no longer any way to escape it. It seemed certain that the entire school would be ripped from its base and hurled into the air, along with all of us. I gritted my teeth and prayed. I am confident that we all prayed. By God's grace, it worked in some way. Just as we believed it was about to crush our skulls, it grew quieter. Finally, everyone could exhale a sigh of relief. Over the next few minutes, all the mounting indicators of danger that preceded the tornado reversed and undid itself until the sun beamed once again and the air was silent. After a few more minutes of waiting to ensure our safety, the lockdown was finally removed, and we were able to stand up. My legs and back were achy, but I was otherwise unharmed. The school was intact, and I could return to class to retrieve my belongings. However, this was not accurate. The main structure was damaged, but still standing, as I walked outside to the field of portables. Though, I witnessed the true extent of the destruction. The portables were gone. Aside from scattered rubble and some protruding pipes, there was not a single trace of them remaining. Even cinder blocks were gone. Everything in my bag was deleted, including my scrapbook, journals, and diary. It was all transported far away with no prospect of being recovered. Knowing that I would have been annihilated if I had remained in my classroom during the storm left me with a feeling I will never forget. It is difficult to express coming so near to death at such a young age. Since then, I have never taken extreme weather threats lightly. Tornado Alley is a part of my life, but I was born and raised in Oklahoma and will remain there.